There's only room for 4 people in this house, and frankly, you're not one of them, my daughter-in-law's brother told me, standing in my own kitchen with a beer he'd taken from my refrigerator without asking. My daughter-in-law stood behind him with her arms folded, nodding slowly like he'd said something reasonable. My son studied the tile floor like it held the answer to a question he was too afraid to ask. I left that afternoon with a single bag. 10 days later, they learned what a quiet man with a clear deed can do. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. The morning it started was a Thursday in early March. I'd spent the first part of it the way I usually spent mornings since retiring from 29 years as a structural engineer. Coffee at the kitchen table, newspaper spread open, the kind of unhurried silence that takes most people decades to appreciate. My house sat on a half-acre lot outside Conroe, Texas, 40 minutes north of Houston. I'd bought it in 2006 with my wife, Patricia. We'd replaced the porch boards together, repainted the shutters twice, planted the pecan tree in the backyard that now gave enough shade to make summer afternoons bearable. After Patricia passed from ovarian cancer 4 years ago, I'd kept every routine we'd built together. The coffee at the same table, the same chair. Her reading glasses still sat on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, exactly where she'd left them, because I hadn't found a reason to move them. I came back from a walk around the neighborhood at 10:30 and saw the moving truck. It sat in my driveway at an angle that blocked the mailbox completely. Not a full moving company, a rental, the kind you pick up yourself. 2 men I didn't recognize were carrying a flat-screen television through my front door, which stood propped open with a brick I kept in the garage for another purpose entirely. I stood at the edge of the driveway for a moment, trying to understand what I was seeing. My son met me at the door before I reached it. He was 35, taller than me by 3 inches, and he had his mother's eyes and none of her courage. His expression was the one he'd worn since childhood when he'd broken something and hadn't figured out yet how to tell me. Dad, hey, so listen. I stepped past him, into my living room. The furniture had been pushed toward the walls. Boxes occupied the center of the floor, stacked without care. The kind of hasty packing that happens when someone is in a hurry or doesn't respect what's around them. My wife's secretary desk, the one she'd used to write letters and pay bills, a piece she'd inherited from her own mother, had been shoved into the corner at an angle, its delicate legs scraping lines across the hardwood. I'd refinished 2 summers ago. My daughter-in-law appeared from the hallway with a clipboard, of all things, directing the 2 men with brisk efficiency. She was organized. I'd always known that about her. She'd been organized since the day my son introduced her to me 7 years ago. What I'd mistaken for competence, I was learning, was something closer to the ability to manage situations in her favor while making you feel like the arrangement was mutual. "Oh, good, you're back," she said, the way you'd say it to a child who'd wandered off in a store. "We were going to call you. What's happening here?" She set the clipboard down on my kitchen counter and folded her hands in front of her with the patient precision of someone who had rehearsed this conversation. My son drifted to the kitchen doorway, neither entering nor leaving. My brother lost his lease. It was very sudden. He and Tasha have nowhere to go right now, and we thought since you have the extra room. Nobody asked me. We knew you'd want to help. She said it without hesitation, the words smooth and confident, carrying the assumption that my preferences were a formality rather than a requirement. It's only temporary. 2 or 3 months while they get settled. Her brother appeared from the hallway. I'd met him twice before at family gatherings. A man of 32 with an easy smile that never quite reached his eyes. He shook my hand with the practiced warmth of someone who'd spent years making first impressions count and second impressions irrelevant. His girlfriend Tasha came out behind him, carrying a cardboard box, looking genuinely uncomfortable, the only honest face in the room. "Mr. Coleman, I really appreciate this," her brother said. "You're doing us a solid. We'll be out of your hair before you know it." I didn't agree to this. He glanced at my daughter-in-law and back to me with the mildly confused expression of a man who'd been told the deal was already done. "Well, I mean, we're already here, so..." My son cleared his throat. "Dad, it's just for a little while. The guest room was just sitting empty." The guest room. My wife had called it the reading room. She'd kept a love seat in there, a floor lamp, shelves holding the books she'd collected over 40 years of teaching 8th grade English. Every summer since she died, I'd gone in there on her birthday and read the first chapter of whatever she'd been reading when she got sick. A worn paperback copy of Gilead, its spine cracked and pages soft from handling. It sat on the third shelf where she'd left it. I hadn't moved it. I went upstairs. The reading room was no longer a reading room. The love seat had been pushed against the wall to make space for a queen mattress still in its plastic wrapping. The books were stacked on the floor in 2 uneven piles, their arrangement destroyed. Gilead was somewhere in the middle of the larger pile, no longer visible from the doorway. I found it, checked that it was undamaged, and held it in my hands for a moment. Then I put it under my arm, walked back downstairs, past my daughter-in-law, who was explaining something to the moving men, past my son, who was looking at his phone, out the front door, and sat in one of the porch chairs and read 11 pages without acknowledging anyone until the moving truck finally left. That evening at dinner, around my kitchen table that fit 4 people comfortably and 5 with elbows tucked, her brother set the tone for what life was about to become. He talked the way some men do when they've decided a room belongs to them loudly, about nothing particularly important, filling every silence before it could offer anyone else a turn. He had opinions about my neighborhood, my neighborhood's HOA, the hardware store 2 miles away, and the brand of mustard I kept in my refrigerator door. This place could really open up if you took out that wall between the kitchen and the dining area, he said. Gesturing at the wall, my wife and I had specifically chosen not to remove because it held the frame for a window she'd loved. I know a guy. Could probably do it on the cheap. That wall stays. Just an idea. No need to get defensive. My daughter-in-law touched his arm lightly. The kind of touch that means, not yet. Tasha asked me about the pecan tree. I told her we'd planted it in 2008. She said it was beautiful. I thanked her. It was the only decent exchange at the table. Over the next 4 days, the occupation became systematic, in the way that only happens when the people doing it feel no obligation to notice what was there before them. Her brother claimed the spot in the driveway that I'd parked in for 19 years, forcing my truck to the street. He adjusted my thermostat each morning, dropping it to 68 degrees, and when I turned it back to 72, he'd drop it again an hour later without comment. He used my workshop in the garage, something I hadn't offered, and left my tools out of their places, which after 29 years of engineering had become a system as intuitive to me as breathing. My daughter-in-law redistributed the kitchen. This I noticed on the second morning when I reached for my coffee mug and found the cabinet empty. She'd reorganized everything, all 4 people's things merged into a new arrangement that made collective sense and no individual sense, the way someone reorganizes a space when they've decided it belongs to everyone equally. Patricia's reading glasses were gone from the windowsill. I found them in a drawer, tucked under some dish towels like they were clutter. I took them out, cleaned them with the hem of my shirt, and placed them in my bedroom on the nightstand where I could see them. On the 4th day, I came downstairs at 6 in the morning to find her brother sitting in my chair. Not the kitchen chairs, my chair. A leather recliner I'd bought in 2009 that sat beside the window in the living room with a side table for my coffee and the reading lamp angled just right. I'd spent more evenings in that chair than I could count. After Patricia died, I'd spent entire nights in it, unable to sleep in a bed that felt too large, watching the dark outside the window until morning came. He'd moved it 3 feet to the left, out of its position, and put his feet up on the ottoman with the ease of a man who had decided comfort was a matter of proximity rather than ownership. "Morning," he said. I made my coffee, came back, and stood beside the chair without speaking until he looked up. "You need something?" "That's my chair." He looked at it, then at me, with the tolerant expression of someone managing a minor inconvenience. "There's plenty of room. Sit on the couch." "I don't want to sit on the couch. That's my chair." "Man, it's just furniture. You're making this weird." My son was in the kitchen doorway. I looked at him. He looked at his phone. I sat on the couch. I drank my coffee. I thought about things with the cold precision I'd learned to apply to structural problems when the math wasn't adding up and something eventually was going to fail. The confrontation arrived on a Sunday morning, 8 days after the truck had appeared in my driveway. I'd seen it coming the way you see weather coming in flat country from a long way off. Nothing to block the view. They were all at the kitchen table when I came downstairs. My son, my daughter-in-law, her brother, Tasha. Everyone assembled, coffee made, an arrangement that had the deliberate feeling of a meeting rather than a morning. Her brother had his elbows on my table, fingers laced, the posture of a man who'd been appointed spokesperson. "We need to talk about the space situation," he started. I poured my coffee and sat down. 4 adults in one house is tight. You know that. And Tasha and I need a little more room to function. The guest room is fine for sleeping, but we need somewhere to actually live. So we were thinking the master suite makes more sense for us. Long term. More square footage, bigger closet. You'd be comfortable in the guest room. I set my coffee mug down carefully. You want me to move out of my bedroom. We want everyone to be comfortable. It's really about using this space efficiently. I looked at my son. He was looking at his mug. My daughter-in-law spoke then, in the careful, measured tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable while saying unreasonable things. "Dad, you rattle around in that room by yourself. It's 3 times the size of the guest room. It just makes practical sense." "That's my bedroom. Mine and Patricia's." A brief pause. Her brother shifted in his chair. "I understand it has sentimental value." "It's not sentiment. It's my house." "You keep saying that." His voice sharpened. "But 4 people are living here now. We all have to compromise. 3 people moved in without asking me. Look," he leaned forward. "We're trying to be adults about this. You can keep the room if you want to dig in, but honestly, if you need your own space and your own quiet, it might just be easier if you found somewhere else to stay while we're getting on our feet. We'd have more room. You'd have more peace. Everybody wins." I looked at my son one more time. He finally met my eyes. His expression asked me silently to let it go. "Is that what you want?" I asked him directly. "You want me to leave my house?" He pressed his lips together. "Nobody's saying permanently, Dad. Just," I asked a yes or no question. He said nothing. He looked back at his mug. I stood, pushed in my chair, went upstairs, and took my time. I came down 40 minutes later with a rolling suitcase, a banker's box of documents, and my laptop bag over one shoulder. I carried Patricia's reading glasses, wrapped in a soft cloth in my shirt pocket. My daughter-in-law saw the suitcase from the living room. "You're not actually... You told me to find somewhere else." I said it without stopping. "I'm taking your advice. We didn't mean right now. We meant eventually." I closed the front door behind me. Not a slam. Patricia had always said that a door closed quietly carried more weight than one slammed, because a slam was emotion and a quiet click was decision. I drove to the Lakeview extended stay on FM 3083. The woman at the desk was a heavy-set grandmother type named Dolores, who took one look at my face and bumped me to a corner unit on the 2nd floor with a desk and a coffee maker without my asking. I thanked her genuinely. She nodded like she'd seen this particular situation more times than she cared to count. The room smelled like carpet cleaner and recycled air, but it had what I needed. Quiet. A desk. A chair no one else had claimed. I unpacked my documents and spread them across the desk, in the order I'd learned over 3 decades of solving problems. What you know, what you need to know, and what you need to do. The deed to the house in Conroe was in my name alone. I'd bought it before my son was 20. He'd been living there rent-free for 3 years, since he and my daughter-in-law married and agreed to help around the house in lieu of payment, an arrangement that had looked like family generosity and had lately begun to look like something else. The mortgage had been paid off in 2018. The house was mine in a way that was not sentimental, not complicated, and not subject to interpretation. On the 2nd day, going through my email, I found something I'd almost forgotten about. 2 years earlier, my son had called me with urgency in his voice. He and my daughter-in-law had found a house they wanted to put an offer on. They needed $40,000 for a down payment, a loan, not a gift. He'd been emphatic about that. A loan with monthly repayments. His email from November of that year was still in my inbox, clear as a legal document. "Dad, I want to be straight with you. This is a loan. I'll pay you back $2,000 a month starting in January. You have my word on that." I'd transferred the money within 48 hours. The house deal had fallen through. My son and daughter-in-law had stayed living with me, temporarily, while they saved for a different property. The repayments had never started. Not January, not any month since. I'd brought it up once, gently, and he'd said things got tight and I'd let it go because he was my son. And Patricia had always been the one who knew how to hold people accountable without damaging the relationship, and I hadn't quite figured out how to do it without her. I built the spreadsheet on my second night at the extended stay. 25 months of missed payments. $2,000 per month. Principal $50,000. Interest at Texas statutory rate. The number at the bottom of the column was not a small number. On day 3, Frank called. Frank lived next door, a retired postal worker who'd been our neighbor for 15 years. The kind of man who noticed things and remembered them. His voice was careful when I answered. Hey, didn't want to stick my nose in, but there were cars parked on your lawn last night. Maybe 6 or 7. Music until well past midnight. I was going to call you, but it was late. I'm not there right now, Frank. A pause. Oh, well, that explains what I'm seeing. You doing all right? I will be. Let me know if you need anything. I added his call to my notes. On day 4, he called again. Her brother had been in the garage, apparently, using power tools at 7 in the morning, and had left the side door open all day. By day 5, I'd read everything available online about Texas property law, homeowner rights, and the specific legal distinction between a guest and a tenant. I'd also found, through a referral from a former colleague, the name of a property attorney in the Woodlands named Sandra Park. Her office occupied the second floor of a professional building off Grogan's Mill Road, clean and practical, with the organized feel of someone who didn't waste square footage any more than she wasted words. She was in her mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up on her head, and she reviewed the 2 pages I'd written without interrupting me once. You prepared this yourself, she said when she finished. I'm an engineer. I document things. She smiled briefly. Good habit. Let me tell you where you stand. She opened a folder and laid the relevant statutes flat. This is your property. Sole owner, no co-owner, no one else on the deed. Your son has been living there rent-free for 3 years with no written lease and no rental agreement, which under Texas law makes him a tenant at will, which means you can end the arrangement. 30 days written notice, legally served. The brother and his girlfriend, they've been there 8 days with nothing in writing. They're guests. You can revoke guest permission immediately with proper notice. My daughter-in-law argued it was our son's house too because he lives there. Living somewhere is not ownership. If I stay in a hotel for a year, I don't own the hotel. Your son has been a guest who stopped being a paying guest. She paused. He may have established some tenancy rights by length of stay, which is why we do the 30-day notice correctly. The brother and girlfriend have no standing whatsoever. What does the notice say exactly? It states clearly that their permission to occupy the property has been revoked, the legal basis, the date by which they must vacate, and the consequences if they don't. A judge signs off if they refuse. Texas courts are very direct about this. Property owners have strong protections here. She drafted the notice while I waited, working with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this before, and saw no reason to be slow about it. The document came off the printer looking exactly as official as it needed to look. We walked down the hall to a notary named Richard, who verified my identity against the deed, applied his seal with the gravity of someone who understood paper, and handed it back to me. One suggestion, Sandra said as I put the document in my folder. Don't argue with them. Don't justify. Hand them the notice and say the document explains everything. Further questions go to me. They'll push for an emotional response. Don't give them one. I spent 30 years on construction sites, I said. I know how to wait for the structure to hold. She looked at me for a moment and nodded once. I drove back to my house on a Wednesday morning. My son and daughter-in-law both left for work before 8. I confirmed it through Frank, who'd become my unwilling but cooperative intelligence network. The brother and Tasha, based on Frank's observations, didn't surface before 10. I had 2 hours. My key still worked. They hadn't thought to change the locks. which told me they still believed this was a temporary negotiation rather than a structural failure. The locksmith I'd called arrived 11 minutes after me, a compact and methodical man named Gary, who took one look at the deed I showed him and said simply, 4 exterior doors? 4 exterior doors. He worked efficiently. I helped where I could, and we moved through the house the way you move through a job you've prepared for, quietly and without sentiment. Each new lock installed with the satisfying solidity of a decision made and committed to. Gary reset the garage keypad to a 6-digit code I chose myself and handed me 6 copies of each key. Family situation? He said. The same way people say it when they mean, you don't need to explain. Something like that. Before I left, I walked through every room with my phone camera, documenting what was there and what had changed. The living room furniture pushed out of its arrangement, my recliner still displaced from its spot. In the master bedroom, her brother and Tasha had moved their things in despite never being given permission. Clothes hanging in the closet that Patricia had organized by season, perfume bottles on the dresser surface. In the corner near the window, the small cedar chest where I kept Patricia's letters and the photographs from our first decade together had been moved to make room for a pair of boots. I found the thing I was dreading on the 3rd shelf of the reading room. The books had been stacked carelessly when they were moved on the first day, but most were intact. Gilead was where I'd seen it last. But Patricia's annotated copy of the collected poems of Mary Oliver, the one she'd taught from for 12 years, every margin dense with her handwriting, observations about particular lines, notes from the year she'd finally started writing her own poems, in the last year of her illness, that book was gone. I went through every shelf, every stack on the floor. I checked the boxes they'd brought in, all of which were still sitting in the reading room waiting to be opened. I searched the entire house for 40 minutes. It wasn't there. I photographed the empty space on the shelf where it had sat. I noted the absence carefully in my log with the timestamp and a description. Then I taped the eviction notice to the front door at eye level where it could not be missed, photographed it in place, and left. I was back at the extended stay when my daughter-in-law's name lit up my phone screen. 4:37 in the afternoon. I let it ring once, then answered. What did you do? My key doesn't work. Her voice was coiled tight. I changed the locks. It's my house. You can't lock us out. We live there. There's an eviction notice on the door. It explains the legal basis and the timeline. You're doing this because we asked you to take the smaller room? This is insane. You're acting like a... Sandra Park is my attorney. I'll give you her number now. I gave it clearly, and then ended the call. She called back twice. I didn't answer. My son called 18 minutes later. His voice had a quality I'd never heard from him before. Something between anger and the sound a person makes when they've finally understood something they'd been avoiding. Dad, this is a lot. You can't just... You were there at that table. You said nothing. I was trying to keep everyone calm. You know how they get. I know how they get. I don't know why you let them make that request at my table in my house. A long pause. Where are we supposed to go tonight? The notice gives 30 days. That's the legal requirement, and I'm honoring it. Tonight, Dad. Right now. You're resourceful enough to have invited 4 people to live in my house without asking me. I believe you can find a hotel. I ended the call. He tried 3 more times before midnight. I didn't answer any of them. The brother left a voicemail. I listened to it once, forwarded it to Sandra as documentation, and deleted it. Through my window at the extended stay, the interstate traffic moved in steady lines, red lights and white lights going in opposite directions in the dark. I sat at the desk and worked on my loan spreadsheet, running the numbers with compound interest, building the exhibit binder the way I'd built technical documentation for 30 years. Bank transfer confirmation. Email with explicit repayment terms. A follow-up text 7 months later in which my son had said, "Still planning to pay you back, Dad. Just need 1 more good quarter." Each document hole-punched and labeled. On the 8th day, Sandra forwarded me a letter from a Houston law firm claiming my son had established domicile and could not be evicted without specific cause. It was written on expensive letterhead and was, according to Sandra's email, substantively hollow. Her rebuttal was 3 pages and concluded them methodically. Domicile without tenancy agreement, without exchange of rent, without any legal documentation of residency, created no protected interest under Texas property law. The letter, she noted in the last line, appeared designed to intimidate rather than inform. I filed it in a folder labeled as expected. On the 9th day, Frank called again. He'd seen the brother standing in the front yard with his phone, apparently taking photographs of the exterior of my house. Frank had asked if he needed anything. The brother had said he was documenting the property for legal purposes. I called Sandra immediately. She was unbothered. Let him document. He can document an empty lot, and it won't change who owns it. I went home on a Thursday. 11 in the morning. Frank confirmed both cars were gone, and the driveway was empty. The house felt different, occupied in a way that had changed its weight. I walked through it with the systematic attention I'd developed in 30 years of inspecting structures for failure points. The damage revealed itself slowly, the way damage usually does when you're looking for it properly. The hardwood in the dining room had 3 deep scratches running almost 2 feet, the kind of marks left by furniture dragged without lifting. My workshop in the garage had been used without care. A table saw adjusted in a way that was both incorrect and dangerous, and 3 of my wife's glass-cased framing awards from her years in teaching knocked off the shelf above the workbench, 2 of them broken. In the reading room, I found Tasha's suitcase, half unpacked, and inside it, wedged between folded sweaters like it had been packed without realizing what it was or simply not caring, was Patricia's copy of the collected poems of Mary Oliver. I stood, holding it in both hands. The margins were intact. Her handwriting was intact. Every page she'd dog-eared was still dog-eared. The poem she'd been reading in the hospital was still marked with a strip of yellow paper. I carried it to my bedroom and put it on the nightstand next to her reading glasses and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and called a property assessment company. The assessor came on Friday, a thorough and quiet woman named Deborah, who moved through the house with a camera and a clipboard and the particular detachment of someone who had learned to separate the emotional value of things from their market value. She noted the hardwood floor damage, the broken awards, the garage equipment damage, a bathroom faucet handle that had been forced and cracked, and the kitchen cabinet hinge that had been broken and apparently rehung badly. Her report came to $6,800. She noted that 2 of the framing awards were custom pieces with no replacement market, which she listed conservatively. I called Sandra from the driveway while Deborah packed her equipment. File the civil suit for the property damage. File the debt claims separately. Both of them. Both. There was a brief pause. You're certain they damaged Patricia's teaching awards? They took her book. They need to understand what choices cost. Sandra was quiet for a moment. All right. I'll have the filings ready by Monday. The days that followed had the quality of time in a structure that is standing but has been permanently altered, functional, but you know something has shifted that cannot be unshifted. My son was served his lawsuit papers at his office on a Tuesday. His assistant apparently stepped out and came back to find him holding the envelope with both hands, not moving. He called me that evening and said my name in a way that contained more meaning than I knew what to do with. Dad. Hello. You're suing me. I'm collecting a debt you agreed to repay. The distinction matters. I was going to pay you back. 30 months is not eventually. 30 months is never. He was silent for a long time. How am I supposed to come up with that much? After attorney fees, after the extended stay, you took $40,000 from a retired widower who lives on a fixed income and gave him his own word as collateral. I'd like it back. He didn't have an answer for that. Sandra Park handles all further questions about the lawsuit. I won't be discussing it directly. I ended the call. He didn't try back that night. The brother received his property damage demand letter by certified mail. His response, delivered by voicemail in a volume I turned down before it finished, accused me of fabrication, extortion, targeting, and 3 other things I didn't catch because I'd already forwarded it to Sandra. He hired an attorney who sent a counter letter asserting the damages were pre-existing. I sent that attorney the dated photographs I'd taken for my homeowner's insurance renewal the previous October. Every room, every surface, pristine. The attorney did not respond again. The small claims hearing for property damage was attended by the brother without legal representation. He'd apparently discharged his attorney after being informed what winning would cost versus losing. He sat at the defense table in the posture of a man who had decided that confidence was indistinguishable from credibility. He told the judge the damages were already there when they moved in, and that I had a history of making things up. He did not have photographs. He did not have documentation. He did not have anything except the conviction that his version of events was the one that mattered. Judge Carolyn Webb reviewed Deborah's assessment, my insurance photographs with metadata timestamps, and a notarized statement from Frank, who had been inside my house twice in the previous year and had noticed no such damage. Mister, she looked at the paperwork. The photographs taken in October are dated. Deborah's assessment is dated. Your occupancy began in March. The math is straightforward. Do you have evidence of any kind that this damage pre-existed your arrival? He did not. Judgment for plaintiff, $6,800 plus court costs. Driving home from the courthouse, Sandra in the passenger seat reviewing her notes, she said, "You know what I've noticed about people who handle these situations the way you did? The ones who document everything. Stay measured. Don't escalate emotionally. What's that? They usually don't need to come back a second time." I wasn't sure that was true yet, but I appreciated the thought. The civil debt suit was heard 3 weeks later. My son appeared with an attorney, looking thinner than I'd seen him since a difficult year in his mid-20s. My daughter-in-law sat in the gallery, arms folded, expression arranged in the careful neutral of someone managing a situation rather than feeling one. They'd clearly been told not to make faces, and she was doing her level best. The judge reviewed the email chain, the bank transfer record, the text message with the acknowledgement, and the spreadsheet documenting 30 months of zero repayment. "Mr. Coleman," she said to my son, "this email uses the words loan and payback and monthly repayment. Would you describe that as ambiguous?" My son's attorney had coached him. The context was family, informal. It wasn't meant as a binding contract. The word loan appears 4 times in a 6-sentence email. What would it need to say to be binding in your understanding? My son had no answer. Judgment for plaintiff. $52,410, including interest, to be repaid in monthly installments, with wage garnishment authorized upon 2 consecutive missed payments. Outside the courthouse, my daughter-in-law caught up to me on the sidewalk. I kept walking, and she walked beside me, her voice low and controlled. "You've destroyed everything. You know that?" I kept my pace. I protected what was mine. "He's your son." "He is. He was also silent when you told me to leave my own house. He made a choice. He's living with it. We're living with it." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. The first genuine thing I'd heard from her in months. "We can barely make rent, and now this payment every month. You should have thought about what things cost before you spent them." She stopped walking. I didn't. The months that followed had their own rhythm. Payment arrived on the 1st of each month, transferred electronically, noted in my spreadsheet. The brother and his girlfriend found an apartment 20 minutes from where they'd been living, paying significantly more than they'd planned to pay. Frank mentioned seeing his truck less frequently in the neighborhood. I heard through a neighbor I'd known for years that my daughter-in-law's parents, who had been told one version of events, had received my documentation package, 12 pages, chronological, with photographs, legal documents, and a short audio clip of the voicemail her brother had left me, and that her mother had called her after reading it and said things that apparently went poorly. The family network that had briefly formed around the narrative of unreasonable father-in-law had shifted when people read the full account. Not everyone shifted. Some people are loyal to a story they've already accepted, but enough that the calls to my son expressing outrage at my behavior stopped coming. On a Tuesday in June, a familiar car appeared in my driveway. I watched it through the window for a moment before going to the door. My daughter-in-law stood on the porch alone. No armor this time, no crossed arms, no clipboard, no brother behind her. She looked like someone who had been in a long negotiation with herself and come out the other side with less certainty than she'd started with. I opened the door, but not the screen. "I wanted to say something," she said, "and I didn't want to do it on the phone. I waited. I handled this badly from the beginning. I made decisions that weren't mine to make in a house that wasn't mine, and I treated you like an inconvenience instead of the person who owns the place where we live." She paused. "Lived. You moved your brother in without asking me. I know. You sat at my table and told me to sleep on the couch, or leave. I know." Her voice didn't break, but it cost her something to stay steady. I thought I was solving a problem. I was making one. I looked at her for a moment. "Where's my son?" "At home." I told him I needed to do this by myself. I appreciated that, actually. Whatever else was true about her, she'd had the integrity to come without him. "I'm not asking you to forgive us," she continued. "I know where we are with the payments, and I know that's what's right. I just needed to say that to you directly. You didn't deserve how we treated you." I nodded once. "I heard you." She left. I stood at the screen door and watched her car back out of the driveway. And then I went inside and sat in my chair and held my coffee with both hands. That evening I found Patricia's reading glasses on the nightstand and put them back on the kitchen windowsill, where she'd always kept them. The view from that window hadn't changed: the pecan tree, the corner of Frank's fence, the particular slant of evening light through the live oaks along the property line. She'd looked at it every morning while washing dishes. I'd stopped noticing it for a while. I noticed it now. In July, the fourth payment cleared on time. I updated my spreadsheet, did the math, noted the balance, and the months remaining. $43,210 and 21 months to go. Long road, but road's end. I had dinner at Frank's house that week. His wife cooked pot roast and asked me about Patricia, and I told them the story of how she'd proposed to me, which I'd never told anyone before, how she'd done it at a gas station of all places, matter of fact, as a weather report, and how I'd laughed so hard I'd had to put my hand on the hood of the car to keep from falling over. Frank's wife cried a little, the good kind of crying. Frank refilled my glass without asking. My son called on a Sunday in August. Not about the lawsuit, not about the money, not about anything I'd braced myself for. He called to tell me he and my daughter-in-law were separating, said it quietly, without drama, as though he'd practiced saying it simply, and that was the version he wanted me to have. I let him talk. He talked for 20 minutes about what had changed and what he understood now that he hadn't understood before February. Some of it was true. Some of it was the kind of understanding that comes from consequence rather than character. I wasn't sure yet which kind would last. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said at the end. "I don't know if that changes anything." "It doesn't change what happened," I told him. "But it's not nothing either." We stayed on the phone in silence for a while. I watched the pecan tree through the window, the late summer leaves going slightly yellow at the edges. "You doing okay?" he finally asked. "Better than I've been in a while, honestly." In September, I spent 3 weekends refinishing the hardwood floors in the dining room. I rented the equipment from the hardware store and did it myself, the way I'd done everything in this house, methodically, without hurrying, taking breaks to stand back and assess whether what I was doing was working before continuing. The new finish was slightly lighter than the original, but better than I'd expected. I put Patricia's framing awards in for restoration at a frame shop in the Woodlands, run by a careful man named Joseph, who said he could come close on 2 of the 3 and apologized that the 3rd was beyond what any restoration could make right. I thanked him and picked up the 2 that came close and hung them in the reading room where they belonged, on either side of the window. The books went back on their shelves in the order Patricia had kept them. The love seat went back against the wall where it had been. I bought a new floor lamp to replace the one that had been knocked over, and I spent a Tuesday evening sitting in the reading room in that lamplight with Gilead open in my lap, not reading, mostly just being in that room with her things arranged around me, the way she'd arranged them. Then I did read. I started from the beginning and read 40 pages, more than I'd managed in any sitting since she died. On the 1st of October, the 5th payment arrived early, which surprised me. I looked at the transfer time. 11:46 in the morning, on September 30th. He'd sent it a day ahead. I noted it in the spreadsheet. $41,410 remaining, 20 months. A letter arrived with November's payment. I recognized my son's handwriting on the envelope, the same wide, looping cursive he'd had since middle school, the one Patricia had always said came from being left-handed in a right-handed world. "Dad, I don't know how to write this, so I'm just going to. I spent a long time blaming circumstances. The lease situation, Renee's pressure, the money stress. But when I go back to that Sunday morning at your kitchen table, the honest truth is I just didn't stand up. I watched you get treated like a stranger in your own home, and I stayed quiet because I thought staying quiet was the same as keeping the peace. It wasn't. It was just the cheaper version of cowardice. I know the payments are right. I know that. But what I lost isn't in the lawsuit. It's what you must have felt sitting at that table looking at me. I'm sorry for that more than anything else. Neil, I read it twice, standing by the mailbox in the November air, the pecans from my tree scattered across the dry grass around my feet. I folded it and put it in my shirt pocket with the same care I used with Patricia's things. Then I walked inside, put the kettle on, and stood at the kitchen window watching the slant of afternoon light move across the yard the way it always moved, the way it had moved every November afternoon for the 19 years this house had been mine. I thought about writing back. I thought about it for a long time. The kettle boiled. I made my tea and carried it to my chair, back in its exact position by the window, and I sat with the letter on the side table beside me. And I thought about what it means to give someone time to show you who they are, rather than just who they say they'll be. 20 months is a long road, but roads end. Patricia had a poem she loved about forgiveness, annotated in that book I'd found in Tasha's suitcase. I remembered the line she'd written in the margin beside it, in her particular cursive. Forgiveness is not the same as saying it didn't matter. It's saying you matter more than it does. I hadn't decided yet, but I was thinking about it. Outside, the pecan tree stood the way it had always stood, roots deep enough to hold, branches wide enough to give shade, patient in the way of things that have outlasted harder seasons than this one. My house was mine again, quiet, organized, mine. That was, for now, enough. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe to Eclipse Vengeance. Share your thoughts in the comments, I read all of them. And when you're ready for the next story, it's waiting for you in the box on the right.